Well, good morning to each and every one. Glad that we can be together today to worship and to study together. I'd like to begin our lesson by looking at a few verses from Psalm 69. Psalm 69, verse 1 beginning there. The psalmist writes, it says, "Save me, O God, for the waters have come up to my neck. I sink in deep mire where there is no standing. I have come into deep waters where the floods overflow me. I am weary with my crying. My throat is dry. My eyes fail while I wait for my God." I've titled our lesson today, "When Clouds Abide." I'm sure we can all think of a time, usually in the winter, but sometimes other parts of the year, where you'll just have kind of a overcast, cloudy day. Maybe it's rainy, drizzly, maybe even storming. And you think about the orphan Annie, and she sang that song, right? Well, the sun will come out tomorrow. But then you wake up the next day, and it's still just drizzly and miserable. And sometimes you go several days in a row, and it seems like the clouds just abide. And as you think about that concept, I think there are times in life where it seems like we just have clouds hanging over us. And it's hard to shake that sometimes. We're going to look at some different examples of that over the course of our lesson. But primarily we want to look at God's Word and the solutions it provides us, and I guess the mechanisms we can utilize to endure through those times where the clouds seem to keep the sun from shining on our faces. So the first example I'd like us to think about is the idea of remorse. And if you're like me, you look back over the course of your life, you can identify many mistakes. You can identify many things that you have done that you regret. Things that, you know how you'll be trying to fall asleep at night and all of a sudden it just seems like the worst thing you've ever done is trapped in a loop in your mind, and you just sit there and replay it over and over, and you just can't even sleep because you have that remorse that's just built up, and you just wish you could go back and change how you did something. But yet, you can't. You can't go back and fix the past, but yet we remember it, don't we? And that can be difficult. We can get stuck in a cycle or a period of time where it just seems like we can't break out of these clouds of remorse that have just built up over top of us, and it can really get us down. It can be hard to deal with that. You know, in the Gospels we read about different ones who had remorse, and I want to make a contrast between a couple of them here as we start into this section of the lesson. First of all, you think about Judas, who betrayed Jesus. In Matthew chapter 27, verse 3 there, it says, "Judas, his betrayer, seeing that he had been condemned," in other words, that Christ had been condemned due to his actions, says he was remorseful. And he brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders. He said, "I've sinned by betraying innocent blood." And they said, "Well, what's that to us? You see to it." And he threw down the pieces of silver in the temple and departed and went and hanged himself. So sadly, we see here someone who was so remorseful, so upset about what he had chosen to do, that it leads him actually to a place where he sadly takes his own life. And we know that that's not the answer for us when we are filled with remorse. Rather, we should follow and emulate the example of one of the other apostles, Peter, who was just as guilty in all senses of the word of betraying his Lord and denying him. You remember how he denied him not one time, but 3 times. There, as Jesus was in captivity, and Peter was kind of nearby, even though he had distanced himself somewhat as you read through the text there. But in Luke chapter 22, verse 61, after he had denied him that third time, we read this detail that only Luke's gospel account provides, which is rather interesting and very powerful. But it says that in that moment the Lord turned and looked at Peter. So evidently Peter was close enough that Jesus heard what he said, knew what he said, and he turned and he looked at him. And you can just imagine, if you put yourself in Peter's shoes, what that must have been like to suddenly have that realization of what you've just done, and the very person that you've been following, the very Son of God, your Lord and Master, turns and looks at you. In that moment, how powerful that must have been. It says that Peter remembered the word of the Lord, how he'd said to him, before the rooster crows, you will deny me 3 times. And it says that Peter went out and he wept bitterly. Peter had remorse. But unlike Judas, he did not take his own life, but rather he learns from this. And in fact, Jesus facilitates a powerful lesson for him and kind of resetting him, if you will, to get back on track and move forward, having learned from his mistakes, but not being consumed and destroyed by them. And we read this in John chapter 21, John's Gospel account. Chapter 21, verse 15 is where we'll begin reading there. This is one of the occasions where Jesus, having been resurrected, appeared to certain of the disciples and interacted with them. And on this occasion, they are there on the beach and have breakfast together, it says. And so it says, when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. He said to him, feed my lambs. And then a second time, he said, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? He said to him, yes, Lord, you know that I love you. And so he says, tend my sheep. And then he said to him a third time, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And you can imagine, it describes Peter as being grieved because he'd asked him this third time. He's thinking, I've answered this question twice now, and now you're asking me again. But he asked, do you love me? He said, Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you. And Jesus said, feed my sheep. So in other words, Peter had denied him 3 times. I don't know who you're talking about. I have no association with this man. Even got to the point where he began to curse and swear to try and get these people to back off, right? And so here we see the Lord, not once, not twice, but 3 times, asking Peter to affirm him, to affirm his love. And in response to that affirmation, he gives an instruction. Okay? In other words, if you love me, then show me. Tend my sheep, feed my lambs. Do what I've commanded you to do. And so we can learn from this. When we have done something we ought not to have done, when we mess up, we make a mistake in life, whether big or small. It doesn't have to necessarily be some huge thing that everybody knows about. It can just be something between you and God, but nonetheless you have that remorse and it bothers you. But let's follow the pattern, not of Judas, who was just consumed to the point where he gave up, but rather we need to emulate Peter, who learned from that mistake and was determined to move forward in a positive direction, not repeating those same mistakes that caused that remorse, but to act in a different manner, in a better manner. And one of the things we have to remember when it comes to remorse, our human minds, it'd be nice, we would think, right, to be able to truly forget things. Sometimes we do forget things and we don't mean to. But it seems like the things we wish we could forget, those are the things that stick in our minds, right? Like what we're talking about here. But there's an important detail that we're given here in what the Hebrew writer writes in chapter 8, verses 10 through 12. Let's read this and then we'll make some comment. It says, For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, says the Lord. I will put my law into their mind and write them on their hearts. I will be their God, and they shall be my people. None of them shall teach his neighbor, none his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for all shall know me, from the least to the greatest. For I will be merciful to their unrighteousness. And notice he says, Their sins and their lawless deeds I will remember no more. So remember this passage. The next time you find yourself beating yourself up over past mistakes, past sins, things you've done in the past that you regret, remember that you might remember those things, and in some senses it's good that we do so that we can stay sharp and not repeat the mistakes of the past. But remember that God has promised that He's not going to remember those things anymore. God has forgotten them if we have truly turned and repented of them. You notice the attitude of the Apostle Paul, who, of all the apostles, was one that I think it's fair to say, even at times put himself at the front of the line when it came to who's the worst sinner. He writes that there in his first letter to Timothy in chapter 1. But he just actually, in this context of what we're about to read here, been talking about his former manner of life and all the things that he'd done in persecuting the church and all these terrible things that he now regretted. But notice his attitude, verse 13 there. He says, Brethren, I do not count myself to have apprehended. The one thing I do, I forget those things that are behind, and I reach forward to those things which are ahead. I press towards the goal for the prize of the upward call of God in Christ Jesus. So his attitude was not looking behind, but rather looking to the future. Not being consumed with the past, but what am I going to do with the rest of the time that God sees fit to give me? Now, I had the thought, actually just yesterday, and I thought that I would throw it into the lesson here. But the thought is this: your next yesterday is contained in what you're about to do. Think about that as you go through your day. You know, if you're tired of having all these yesterdays that you regret, that you look back on with shame, then change your behavior. Recognize what I'm about to do next is going to become my next yesterday. Do I want to look back on it and have that sense of shame, that sense of remorse? Or do I want to be able to look back and say, I'm proud of what I did here? And I know that God is proud of what I did here. The power is ours as far as the story we're writing of our lives. What else? When clouds abide. Another sense in which this happens sometimes is when we feel rejected. And this can happen in all different areas of life. You might think about perhaps being rejected by family. Maybe because you've chosen to take a stand for the truth on a certain matter, that you've got now people that are the closest to you in this life that are now at odds with you. You know, Jesus talked about how he was going to bring a sword, and that sword was going to put at odds, you know, sons and their fathers and daughters and their mothers, and all these different close-knit relationships that we have, blood relationships. That sword, of course, being the word, the truth. Sometimes we're rejected just by friends or associates. Maybe you think about the workplace, and because you refuse to go out after work with everybody to go to the bar and unwind after a long week or whatever it is, you get made fun of. People kind of poke at you. There's all different ways that we might think about rejection, but sometimes that can kind of loom over us. It just seems like something we're dealing with. We're in a season of rejection, as it were. I want us to think about some things in relation to that. But first, let's notice, you know, we looked at Psalm 69, the first 3 verses there at the beginning. But you notice, as the psalmist continues to write, he expresses this same kind of feeling of rejection. at this time in his life. He says, those who hate me without a cause are more than the hairs of my head. They are mighty who would destroy me, being my enemies wrongfully. Though I've stolen nothing, I still must restore it. Sometimes we feel like that. But you know who was rejected and who had to deal with rejection? Jesus. The prophet would write prophetically of Christ and what he would go through and what he would endure. He says there in Isaiah 53:3, he is despised and rejected by men, a man of sorrows, well acquainted with grief. And we hid, as it were, our faces from him. In other words, we're the ones that rejected him. He was despised, and we did not esteem him. You know, we might think about the Jews of the day and age in which Jesus walked the earth, and we might think, well, that's who he's talking about here. And certainly he is, but we're all in that boat. Because we've all sinned. We've all fallen short of the glory of God, as Romans 3:23 tells us. We've all, at one point or another, hidden, as it were, our faces from him and did not esteem him as he ought to be esteemed. Jesus was well acquainted with this feeling of rejection. There's different ways that we might react to being rejected. And this first example here is one that sometimes I struggle with myself. But we have this account here in Luke chapter 9, verse 51, beginning there. It says, it came to pass, when the time had come for him to be received up, that he steadfastly set his face to go to Jerusalem, and sent messengers before his face. And as they went, they entered a village of the Samaritans to prepare for him. But these Samaritans did not receive him, because his face was set for the journey to Jerusalem. So when his disciples, James and John, saw this, they said, Lord, do you want us to command fire to come down from heaven and consume them just as Elijah did? And don't we feel like that sometimes? Somebody's mistreating us. Or just in general, we see people that are rejecting. Maybe it's not even us personally, but we see them rejecting God, and we look around at what's going on in society today, in the world today, and we feel like this righteous anger welling up within us, and we think, man, if I could just call fire down and just wipe these people out, or just be done with them. That's how they felt. You know, you're going to reject our Lord? How dare you reject the Messiah? Should we destroy these people, Lord? Just like Elijah called down fire? But you notice that Jesus turned to rebuke them. He said, you do not know what manner of spirit you're of. For the Son of Man did not come to destroy men's lives, but to save them. And so they went on to another village. Let's move on down the road. Shake the dust off their feet, as it were. It can be a difficult thing to love our enemies. You know, I think about all the commands that Jesus has given us. Think about just the Sermon on the Mount in and of itself. You know, what is the hardest thing to really adopt and to practice? I think that's right there at the top of the list. It is really hard sometimes to pray for those that despitefully uses and abuses. Ask yourself, when's the last time you prayed for somebody that considers you an enemy? The thing that we have to keep in mind, we're going to see this in an example back in the Old Testament here, and also we're going to see Jesus talking of this same idea in a moment. But when people are rejecting us on the basis of our faith, we have to remember that it's not us, really, that they're rejecting, but they're really rejecting God. In 1 Samuel chapter 8, you remember back in the history of the Israelites at this point in time, they looked at the nations round about them and they said, well, all these guys have kings that are ruling over them, and we want to be like them. We want to have a king. Failing to recognize, of course, the reality of the fact that they had God Almighty as their king. And so they keep pushing this on Samuel. And the thing displeased Samuel. We read there in verse 6. When they said, "Give us a king to judge us." So Samuel goes and prays to the Lord. And the Lord said to Samuel, "Heed the voice of the people in all that they say, for they've not rejected you, but they've rejected me, that I should not reign over them, according to all the works which they have done since the day that I brought them up out of the land of Egypt, even to this day, with which they have forsaken me and served other gods. And so they are doing to you." Jesus would later say in John chapter 15, verse 18, "If the world hates you," as he spoke there to his disciples, "if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. And if you were of the world, then the world would love its own. But yet, because you're not of the world, but I've chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hates you." So, Galatians chapter 6 and verse 9, we have to, thinking back to that episode there with James and John, should we just call fire down, just be done with these people? Should we hate them the way they hate us? No. Remember, Jesus rebuked them for that attitude. Paul wrote in Galatians 6 and verse 9, "Let us not grow weary as we seek to do good, for in due season we shall reap if we do not lose heart." We talked about the importance of patience in our Bible class this morning. How we're instructed to be patient with all. And this certainly plays into this point here. It's difficult to feel that rejection, but we have to remember that if we're standing for what is right, again, they're rejecting God and not us. And that we need to have that sense of pride, knowing that we're standing for what is true, and not grow weary, knowing that in the end we're going to have that eternal reward if we keep faith. People like the idea of fame. I had the thought, fame is useless if he doesn't know who you are. Think about that the next time you feel rejected. Well, if God knows who I am, if God knows my name, this is a play on what Jesus said there in Matthew chapter 7, verse 23. Remember, he talked about those on that day. They're going to say, "Well, Lord, didn't we do all these things in your name and all these great works and so forth?" And he's going to say, I don't know who you are. I've never known you. Who are you? You think about the most famous person on the face of the planet, famous people down through the course of history. Well, what good is that fame on the day of judgment if Jesus doesn't know who they are? Every person on the face of the planet can know your name and think wonderful things about you, but if God doesn't know who you are. And so it's better, realistically, to be rejected by the world, but to have God know our name and be able to look forward to eternity with Him. What about frustration? You ever get frustrated? I'm sure none of you had to ever deal with that, right? Maybe it's related to finances. We're in a period of time where it just seems like every time we get a little bit, it all gets sucked up in some new bill that showed up in the mail. Or, we just can't ever seem to get ahead. We're just paycheck to paycheck, and it's a struggle, it's a grind, and we're just frustrated. Why can't we seem to get out of this? To get ahead a little bit? You can put anything in the blank there that leads you to being frustrated, to some problem that you can't seem to solve. You don't know what to do. I always think about the account back in 2 Chronicles 20 when I think about this idea. 2 Chronicles chapter 20, and we're not going to read that whole chapter for the sake of time, but the king of Judah at the time here is King Jehoshaphat, and he finds himself up against an alliance of his enemies. These different nations have banded together, and their aim is to wipe Jerusalem off the map. And he knows that his army is not adequate to even pose a real defense against these forces that have banded together now to come up against them. And we find him praying here in verse 12 of that chapter. He says, "Oh, our God, will you not judge them? We have no power. against this great multitude that's coming against us. Nor, notice what he says here, nor do we know what to do. So you think you're the only person that's ever felt like you don't know what to do? You're not. That's exactly how he felt. And he was speaking on behalf of the entire nation. That's the way they all felt. Well, what are we supposed to do here? We don't know what to do. But notice the attitude that they had. He says, we don't know what to do, but our eyes are on you. We trust you. We believe in your promises. And our eyes are on you. We're helpless, but we know that you are strong. You are powerful beyond our comprehension. You can solve any problem. Shortly after that, through the prophet they're told the following, verse 17, you will not need to fight in this battle. Imagine that. Imagine hearing that. You know, you've got these overwhelming forces coming your way, and the message that God sends you is, don't worry, you are not even going to have to fight at all in this battle. Well, how's that supposed to work? But they're told to position themselves, to stand still, and to see the salvation of the Lord who is with you, O Judah and Jerusalem. Do not fear or be dismayed. Tomorrow, go out against them, for the Lord is with you. It almost seems like a contradiction. You know, God's saying, all right, tomorrow I want you to go out, take the army out there against these forces, but he just said we're not going to have to fight. So I'm confused. Are you confused? I'm sure they were. But you read on there, and it says early in the morning, they got up and they formed ranks and they marched out. One of the interesting things about it is you might think they'd be kind of glum and down and worried and distraught. Kind of marching, okay, here we go. We're going to go get slaughtered. But no, verse 22 says that they began to sing. In fact, the king appointed special people to specifically sing and praise the Lord as they marched. And so as they began to do that, in the midst of all this frustration, they think, maybe we should worship God. Maybe we should praise God. Despite this frustration. And as they began to do that, notice the Lord set ambushes against the people of Ammon and Moab and Mount Seir who had come against Judah. They were defeated, for the people of Ammon and Moab stood up against the inhabitants of Mount Seir to utterly kill and destroy them. And when they made an end of the inhabitants of Seir, they helped to destroy each other. So that when Judah came to the place overlooking the wilderness, they looked toward the multitude, and there were their bodies fallen to the earth. Not even one of them had escaped. They all turned on each other and wiped each other out. Israel didn't even have to pick up a sword or a shield to fight that day. Reminds me of what Paul expressed in Ephesians chapter 3, verse 20. He says there, to him who is able to do exceedingly, abundantly above all that we ask or think, according to the power that works in us, to him be glory in the church by Christ Jesus to all generations forever and ever. Amen. How many times have you seen God work in such a way in your life where even the scenario that you thought would be best, that the way God works it out is even better than that? You're like, wow, I didn't even think of that as a possibility, and here it is. And really, you can think about it in a big picture sense. Just the problem of sin, and what are we supposed to do? And look at what God has done. Gone beyond anything that we deserve as sinners, sending His only begotten Son, who willingly died, suffered for us, paid that penalty of sin, and rose from the grave and overcame death, gives us the hope of the saint. I love the passage here in Habakkuk chapter 3. I just think it's so very powerful what the prophet writes here and expresses. In verse 17, he says, though the fig tree may not blossom, nor fruit be on the vines, though the labor of the olive may fail, and the fields yield no food, though the flock may be cut off from the fold, and there be no herd in the stalls, yet I will rejoice in the Lord. I will joy in the God of my salvation. The Lord God is my strength, and he will make my feet as the deer's feet. He will make me to walk on the high hills. If that's not a statement of faith in God, kind of reminds me of, remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Daniel chapter 3? And they were being pressured to bow down and worship that golden idol. But what did they say? We're not going to bow down. The Lord will deliver us from your hand, O king. And then I love what they say, but if not, let it be known, we will not serve your gods or bow and worship this idol that you've set up. Such a faith that, even if you do put us to death, we're still not going to do what God said is wrong. We're still going to trust in God and praise God. And even though they were thrown into the fire, they were delivered out of that and didn't even smell as though they had been close to the smoke or the fire at all. We need to think about these things, remember these things when we ourselves are facing frustration. I thought about this. When we find ourselves in one of these kinds of situations, rather than having this distraught attitude, what are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to do? What if we had the attitude of, Lord, I cannot wait to see how you work this together for good. Even if it's something we have to deal with, a cross we have to bear, it's not like it's just magically taken away and removed from our life. Think about the Apostle Paul and how he had that thorn in the flesh, that messenger of Satan to buffet him, as he describes it. And he pled with God 3 times to have it removed. Was it removed? No, God said, my grace is sufficient for you. But yet his attitude was still such that I'm going to even rejoice in this thorn because God is with me and he's my strength and he gives me the ability to deal and overcome all these things. What a different perspective. I just think that's so powerful. I'm still struggling to adopt this myself. When I'm facing a big problem, it's a season of cloudy weather, to look at it and say, God, I can't wait to see how you fix this. But what a faithful way to look at something. Finally, what about isolation? You ever feel all alone? Just feel like you couldn't find a friend if you searched for one, or just everybody's turned against you? I think sometimes when people get more advanced in age and they've lost maybe a spouse and maybe most of the people that they were close with have passed on and they just kind of feel all alone. And I think about people in my life that I'm close to, my grandfather and different ones, and I know that they struggle with that sometimes, that isolation. That's not unique to us today in this period of time we're living in. You think back to the prophet Elijah, for example. 1 Kings chapter 19, we read here that the prophet Elijah went into a cave and spent the night in that place. Behold, the word of the Lord came to him, and he said, what are you doing here, Elijah? And he said, well, I've been very zealous for the Lord God of hosts. The children of Israel have forsaken your covenant. They've torn down your altars and killed your prophets with the sword, and I alone am left. And now they seek to even take my life. This is just after the contest there on the mountain with the prophets of Baal, where God powerfully demonstrated and consumed the altar that Elijah had set up, you recall. But then the powers that be sought to take Elijah's life in retribution for putting all those prophets to death. And so he flees, and we see his attitude, his mindset. It's just me. I'm the only one left. I'm all alone. Right? Well, as you go on down through the text there's several things that the Lord says to Elijah. In In fact, it's almost like he ignores his emotions for a time because he's like, look, I want you to go do this, I want you to go do that. Almost like he just bypasses this strong emotion that Elijah's just confessed and relayed to the Lord. But then we see that he wasn't ignoring it, and he reassures him. There's the latter part of verse 18. He says, I've reserved 7,000 in Israel, all whose knees have not bowed to Baal, and every mouth that has not kissed him. In other words, God says, you're not alone. You gotta get that out of your mind. There's still 7,000 faithful in Israel. So you go and you keep working for me. You keep doing what I'm commanding you to do. Don't let yourself get defeated. John chapter 16. Again, you think about somebody who undoubtedly could have felt alone in what he went through is our Lord. John 16, verse 31, Jesus said, you now believe indeed, the hour is coming. Yes, it's now come that you will be scattered each to his own. And notice, you will leave me alone. That's exactly what happened. Remember when he was arrested, it says all the disciples forsook him and fled. But notice, he says, yet, I am not alone, because the Father is with me. These things I've spoken to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you'll have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world. Jesus recognized that as long as the Father was with him, he was never truly alone. And that promise of them being with us is something that has been given to you and I. John chapter 14 and verse 23, Jesus answered and said, if anyone loves me, will keep my word, and my Father will love him, and we will come to him, and notice we will make our home with him. We'll dwell with him. We'll abide with him. The Hebrew writer in chapter 13 and verse 5 says, let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with the things that you have, because he himself has said, I will never leave you nor forsake you. That's a powerful thought when we're feeling all alone. I had the thought on this point. When life sinks your ship, remember that with Christ, you can walk on the water. You know, the ship is, we all have a ship, as it were. We think about, taking care of our house and our family and all these different things. And that's our security. That's our boat, right? As long as we got that, we're good. Well, what happens when life takes all that away? Well, most people would flail around in the water and drown. What are we supposed to do now? But remember when that storm was upon the ship and Jesus came walking on the water, and Peter said, Lord, if it's you, let me come down out of the ship. As long as he kept his eyes on Christ, he walked right on that water along with him. And that's what we need to remember. When we're feeling all alone, we feel like the ship's been destroyed, we're just hanging on by a thread, remember that it's not over. Because with God, you can overcome the world, just as Jesus did. You can walk on the waves. You can still have that crown of life. So as we begin to wrap up then this morning, when clouds abide, and one thing we need to remember, and this is true in a physical sense, but I think it's also true, even more so, in a spiritual sense. You recognize that when it's a cloudy day, does that mean the sun is not there anymore? No, the sun's still up there. It's just the clouds are in the way. And so it is when we're going through difficulties in life. It's not that God is just forsaken us, that he's not there anymore. The reality is that the sun still shines. Isaiah chapter 60 and verse 1 says, Arise, shine, for your light has come. The glory of the Lord is risen upon you. For behold, the darkness shall cover the earth, and deep darkness the people. But the Lord will arise over you, and his glory will be seen upon you. The Gentiles shall come to your light, the kings to the brightness of your rising. Even on the darkest of days, if we have faith in God, we can still shine and we can still draw others to that light. I don't think there's a more powerful example we can set than demonstrating faith even in the midst of trial and difficulty in life. People look at that and they say, what's different about this person? Why do they still have a smile on their face? Look at what they just lost. Look at what they're dealing with. How on earth can they have joy? What is this? That draws people, that makes people curious. What is that? Where do you get that light? Where do you get that smile? And then you tell them. See? I thought it would be just wrong to not include the lyrics of this song in a lesson like this. A song that we sing sometimes called The Unclouded Day. I thought it would be a fitting way for us to conclude this morning. The lyrics there are, they tell me of a home far beyond the skies. They tell me of a home far away. They tell me of a home where no storm clouds rise. Oh, they tell me of an unclouded day. They tell me of a home where my friends have gone. They tell me of that land far away, where the tree of life in eternal bloom sheds its fragrance through the unclouded day. They tell me of a king in his beauty there. They tell me that mine eyes shall behold where he sits on the throne that is whiter than snow, in the city that is made of gold. They tell me that he smiles on his children there, and his smile drives their sorrows all away. And they tell me that no tears ever come again in that lovely land of unclouded day. Psalm 42, verse 5. The psalmist asks the question, he's really speaking to himself. He says, why are you cast down, O my soul? Why are you disquieted within me? Hope in God, for I shall yet praise him for the help of his countenance. So that is our lesson this morning. Get your song books out and open up there to a song that our brother has chosen as an invitation. Jesus is calling. Jesus is calling us to, as the song says, to that unclouded day. He wants to give us light even in the darkness of this world. Even in all of our mistakes, all of our sins, he seeks to forgive and to cleanse us. But we have to make the decision to turn to him and to come to him, to answer that call. So if that is you this morning, if you've never answered that call, if you've never repented of your sins, you've never confessed Christ, never been baptized for the forgiveness of your sins, why not? Why abide in the darkness yet? Why deal with these things on your own, be consumed by them? Why not have hope? And know that despite the darkness of this world, there is something that waits that is beyond our comprehension. If you're here and you're struggling as a Christian, maybe as we've been going through this lesson, you're thinking, yeah, this is exactly what I'm going through right now. I've got these clouds hanging over me. You know, one of the things that we didn't really touch on too much in this lesson, but nonetheless is a blessing as God's people, is we have each other. God has designed it that way, for us to be as a body. In fact, our brother talked about that in class this morning as he related some of his personal experiences. In Colossians chapter 2, there's a couple places there in that chapter, I can't remember exactly which verses they are, but it talks about how the body is knit together in love. And I like that language because that speaks to the intimate relationship that we have with each other. We're not just acquaintances that see each other here and there a couple times a week. No, we're knit together. And we support each other. So if you need support this morning, if you need prayers, you need encouragement, this is likewise an opportunity for you to receive that. So whatever your need is, if we stand and sing together, we ask that you make these things known. Come up.
Jesus is tenderly calling thee home, calling